Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. Today we're discussing strategies to support the long-term development of social and emotional skills. Teaching skills like creativity, collaboration and empathy is increasingly recognised as a vital part of education, but in the most recent OECD survey on the topic, major challenges were identified to improving these skills in the classroom. A lack of teacher training, official resources, and a lack of high-quality techniques to assess and support social and emotional learning were among the issues identified. So what guidance and tools can policymakers and educators use or need to drive real progress? Well, we're going to have a panel discussion in a moment on all of this, including on new OECD analysis that identifies techniques to support the teaching and measurement of social and emotional skills. But first up, we're going to have a presentation from OECD policy analyst Hannah Ulfertz, who's from the OECD's Directorate for Education and Skills. She's going to give us an overview of the latest OECD research in this area. Over to you, Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Duncan. Let me just share my slides. So I will now provide you with global insights on students' social and emotional learning in school, as Duncan said. That is based on the latest findings of the OECD survey on social and emotional skills. We collected data in 2023, where we assessed social and emotional skills, but also students' learning environments from over 70,000 10 and 15-year-old students around the globe. For example, in North, Middle, and South America, as well as in Western and Eastern Europe. We also had some cities and sites in the MENA region and in South, Southeast, and East Asia. The publication covers other topics, but I will focus really on schools because schools are really the perfect hub for social and emotional learning. You need to learn how to control stress, how to control your emotions. You need to persist in your learning, be creative and curious, sometimes also tolerant and empathetic because you need to cooperate with your classmates. So you need to incorporate also their needs and their opinions. But at times you also need to be assertive and stand your ground. But there's often a misconception that it will happen automatically because it's a social setting. But that's actually not the case. It really requires as much as academics, intentional teaching and guided practice. Because what we actually see, if we manage to create a nurturing school environment where students feel they belong, actually students report greater social and emotional skills. In particular, sociability, optimism, energy, and trust is higher. And also if students report more positive emotions and less negative emotions. But what we also see is that students do not equally benefit from this nurturing environment. For example, we see differences between the genders. Girls often perceive their learning environment as less positive. And we see that across the board in a lot of sites, but we also see important differences. For example, in Emilia-Romagna, the differences are quite stark. And we also observe quite stark differences in skills between the genders. On the other hand, in Delhi, for example, girls perceive their learning environments relatively equally to boys on most of the indicators. And also the differences in skills are less pronounced than in most sites. What also matters a lot is, of course, relationships. Teachers and peers are important, and students having better relationships to both report higher skills. But what we also see is that teachers and peers are perceived as less caring when students move from primary to secondary education. So, for example, 8 out of 10 10-year-olds agree that if they walked into their class upset, their teacher would be actually concerned about them. That drops to less than 7 out of 10 when we talk about 15-year-olds. Another important feature is actually regular feedback from our teachers. Teachers really matter, and those receiving more feedback report higher skills. That goes for all of the social and emotional skills that we assess, but particularly in the area of task performance skills. And for example, in most sites, those students that receive more feedback report a higher achievement motivation, but it's less the case when we look at other skills such as empathy. But we also have a few sites where teacher feedback relates more or less high to both aspects in Gunma, Dubai, and Jinan, for example. And one explaining factor can be, of course, that the type of feedback provided differs across different sites. And actually, if we look at different types of feedback, then we see that a lot of feedback is provided on how to improve performance. 40% of students say they receive regular feedback. Also on further areas of improvement, and that makes perfect sense. School is all about improving and helping students to grow personally. But only a quarter of students actually report to receive regular feedback on strengths. And a lot of these 15-year-olds will soon enter the job market, and they need to know also what they are good at to pick their job wisely. And we see important differences. For example, here, Jinan, China, Dubai, there's more balanced feedback versus in Ukraine, for example, we see the strong focus on improvement. Another important aspect is really to try to create a shared mindset among the school staff about social emotional learning. Because if we look at how social emotional learning is mostly done in sites, then this is actually integrated across the board, across different subjects. Whether it's arts, reading, or mathematics, teachers are required to integrate social emotional learning. And that is almost universal in Kudus, for example, in Helsinki and Spain. On the other side, we see Dubai, for example, that's less the case. They teach these skills rather as a separate subject, and there are different advantages, disadvantages. We can discuss this also later if you want to. But if we go for this integrated approach, then of course we need a shared mindset that these skills matter, in particular, matter for academic performance, which is actually the case. If we look at the evidence, even in our own study, we see that. But in most of the systems, that's actually not a shared mindset across the teachers. And I'm more inclined to incorporate it into my math and science teaching if I think it has a benefit for my students in terms of math and science performance. There's also a lack of this shared mindset. Not everyone agrees on school when we look on other indicators, for example, that social emotional learning has an impact on youth employment and economic success. Only 2 out of 10 students are in schools where everyone shares this belief. It's a bit higher in Dubai and in Kudush, for example. And also that teachers should be responsible for social emotional learning. On average, 4 out of 10 students are on such a school. It's a bit more the case in Dubai, Helsinki, and Kudus. And one explanation, of course, for this lack of a shared feeling of responsibility is that there's a lack of support and training. Because there's often also a misconception that, well, you don't need a lot of training, it will just happen somehow. But actually, no, it's an important and challenging job to continuously incorporate social emotional learning. And you need training and support. And we actually see that social emotional education is unfortunately underrepresented in teacher training. There's a huge percentage in most of the system that had no training on different topics with regard to social emotional education. It's less the case in Kudush, Delhi, Jinan, for example. And you could think that it's just a sign of a general lack of training, but that's actually not the case. If you look, for example, at Peru, Emilia-Romagna, and Spain, both have 13% of teachers who say they don't have training on classroom practice, content, and pedagogy. But the share is double as high in Emilia-Romagna in Spain compared to Peru of the teachers. They say that they actually lack training in social emotional learning. Another important thing is, of course, the teachers, as Duncan said, need also good resources to incorporate social emotional learning into their teaching. And we see that a substantive share of teachers rely heavily on unofficial resources, mainly from the web. That's a third of teachers regularly, really heavily draw on these resources, and around 50% on official resources, such as curricula or tools from governments or local authorities. And in Brazil, it's almost 50% that draw heavily on both. And there's a lot of good material, of course, also online, but there's also a lot of misconception and inefficient resources. And an area where teachers particularly need more support is to integrate effectively social and emotional teaching into online and remote teaching, especially for social skills. A lot of teachers are actually skeptical that, for example, cooperation, empathy, and trust can be fostered online. That's only less than 3 out of 10 teachers who think that is the case. And 6 out of 10 are thinking that these skills are rather hindered online and remotely. If you want to find out more, read our latest publication or join round 3 if you really want to find out about the skills in your city, in your country, and about the learning environment. There will be a direct assessment of empathy. There will be new exciting themes, for example, teachers' own social and emotional skills, and also the responsible and safe use of AI and social media. There will also be optional support for schools, teachers, and policy makers to make the most out of the data. So if you're interested, please reach out to us. And thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion now.
Thank you so much for that opening presentation, Hannah. Very interesting indeed. And it's good to see the chat is so active. Lots of people joining us. Hello to Daruba in Nepal, to Paolo in Brazil, to Bethan in Wales, and many, many more of you joining us as well. Like Hannah said, if you're interested in signing up to take part in the next survey of social and emotional skills, then you can do so. There are questions coming in, Hannah, already. And people having discussions on the chat. And I know we've got a panel to introduce, but just to throw one your way quickly, James Michael Walker picks up on what you were talking about regarding gender differences in social and emotional skills. And he wants you to elaborate on that. Why are there gender differences in social and emotional skills, he asks?
Well, why there are probably different factors. We see in our data, for example, as I said, there are differences when it comes to how we perceive the learning environment. There are also differences between genders in some sites on how much I actually engage in extracurricular activities. And these, again, relate to social and emotional skills. There are also gender differences in other aspects, like, for example, teacher feedback and so on. And all of these, and probably we haven't covered all of them, and we hope in the third round we will cover more of them and understand better what to do and how to balance these out. But what we, for example, see is that boys need an extra push when it comes to tolerance, for example, girls more when it comes to stress resistance, for example. But there's a couple of skills where actually girls report they have lower skills compared to boys.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for that. And do keep the questions coming. For the panel, who I think it's probably a very good time to introduce them. Let's get underway. So Tomasz Gajderowicz is joining us. He's Deputy Director for Research of the Education Research Institute in the Polish capital, Warsaw. Also joining us today, Raymond Buneda, Associate Professor at St. Joseph University of Beirut, an advisor to the President of the Center for Education Research and Development in Lebanon's Education Ministry. And also Daniel Catarino da Silva, a former OECD education analyst who also carried out a lot of research on social and emotional skills. So I think we've got a decent panel to go underway. Please do send your questions in for any of them. To begin with, let's discuss how we can turn some of this research into practice. Dr. Buneda, what are your reflections on Hannah's presentation, if I can start with you? And why has Lebanon decided to join round 3 of the survey of social and emotional skills?
Thank you, Duncan, for your question. Essentially, the presentation of Hannah is very, very, very good. And in fact, it was a decision that we took in the ministry because the last 4 or 5 years, especially after the many crises, unfortunately, and the COVID, the port of Beirut, and the COVID, the crisis also keep on going. The crisis. We as the Ministry of Education, and especially at CERD, the Center for Education Research and Development, so we made a lot of. First of all, we had developed the national framework for SEL, and the social emotional learning. And we delivered a lot of training for the teachers from the preschool till the cycle 3, eventually covering the main SEL competencies, and those training modules were developed across all the public sector, especially in Lebanon, and implemented in classes. The idea that, to answer directly now your question, we were interested in studying the impact of these initiatives, all the members of the educational community in Lebanon, especially that, just I want to explain a little bit. In Lebanon, we have like 35% from the schools are from the public sector, and 65% from the schools are from the public sector. And the public sector mainly, they have their strategy of SEL, and they are collaborating directly also with the ministry. So that's why we are interested to know if those initiatives went well, and if there's any, let's say, any effective or any good impact from those initiatives on the student eventually at the end. So that's why we said that we need to have this international benchmark, and we need to be part of the SSES in order to, let's say, to understand teachers, students, principal, and parents' needs with regards to SEL, eventually to be well informed and to have a better decision for future interventions.
Okay, understood. And if you were to characterize the current state of social and emotional learning in Lebanon, how would you characterize it, and what strategies would you like to see prioritized to promote those kinds of skills?
In fact, like I was saying, we have a lot of trainings that we did for the SEL, for the social emotional learning, and we need to have the data, right? So those steps in training teacher for the SEL also, as I said, included a lot of theories behind the SEL and some practical activities. But again, I will repeat, we are very interested in being part of the SSES program, because we will have more in-depth data and more in-depth info in order to have better decisions. And I believe also that teachers might need more resources, such as lessons plans, or integrated, so to integrate the SEL activities in classes. So this is the idea behind why Lebanon decided to be part of this, in order to implement the best, or to know more about the other countries' experiences. Thank you, Duncan.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me bring in Tomasz Kajderowicz from the Education Research in Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining us again. Tomasz, your research focuses on students joining the labour market. Were you surprised by some of the findings on the lack of a shared mindset among school staff regarding the importance of social and emotional skills for youth unemployment? Tomasz, apologies, we can't hear you. I wasn't sure if it was just me.
No, it's all of us. Yeah.
It's all of us.
We heard you before, so.
Do you want to try speaking? Oh, we seem to have lost your sound, which is very unfortunate.
Let me check. What about
There,
this?
you're back
Perfect.
now. So there you go, Tomasz. There we go. Over to you again. Forgive me. Start again.
Sorry for that. So yeah, Poland is really great case to be discussed here in terms of socio-emotional skills. Because if you look at the international large-scale assessment and the state of education in Poland, we progressed a lot. I mean, that's a story of successful educational reform, what we did between the year 2000 and the year 2018. That was really amazing. We were in the year 2018, we were like the famous Finland, who dropped, but we were really on the top. Now, if you look at the non-cognitive scales that are available in the large-scale assessments, like the sense of belonging, like the well-being, how students feel in the classroom, we are almost at the last positions among all the participating countries. That's the evidence from PISA. But you will see exactly the same picture. Even today, the TIMSS data was released from 2023, showing exactly the same. Guess which country is at the very, very last position in terms of students' sense of belonging, in terms of teachers' job satisfaction? That is Poland. So, I mean, our educational system is teaching well. At the same time, students are left behind with really poor emotional state. They are really not felt belong to school. They feel that school is not giving them much in their life. And even though their achievement is very high, at the same time, they do not appreciate it at all. And they are not able they don't have abilities in those emotional and social skills. So the reason why Poland joined the survey is to investigate these issues in detail. So thanks to Hannah's presentation, we see the huge potential of this survey. And we would like to really deep dive into that issue because of three things. First of all, what you mentioned is the labor market transition. So the attitudes that we have at the beginning of our professional journey, that's something that shapes our future career. But at the same time, Poland is now preparing the huge curriculum reform, not only curriculum assessment and pedagogy. And like looking at the recent diagnosis we have, so really great achievement. Actually, we dropped in the last edition of PISA because we had the schools closed for one of the longest periods, which also had the impact on the socio-emotional skills. We had several bad things that happened in education over the last few years, but still we are way above the OECD average. But in terms of those emotional variables, we have huge challenges. And now preparing for the educational reforms to address these issues. As Hannah said, social and emotional skills can be shaped. This is not something that you can just say, well, this is the cultural issue and that can be like left like that. No, this is the huge challenge and we would like to consciously address it. And that's why we need data, we need evidence. And that is why we are joining the survey.
I know you say you need the data and the evidence, Thomas, but out of interest, are there any specific strategies or techniques which you already think would better encourage school staff to prioritize social and emotional learning?
I think for years this topic was somehow ignored. And also the biggest issue that really decides on the successful implementation of the strategies related to social and emotional skills is that if teachers are able to introduce these interventions. Well, again, in TEMS survey and PEARLS survey, teachers' job satisfaction in Poland was at the lowest of all participating countries. So how a teacher who does not feel well in the classroom, who is not equipped with tools to support students' emotional and social skills, is able to manage that? I think that the support for teachers is the most important thing that we should consider in the next steps. Of course, then comes another topic, then how that support should be shaped. And if you look at the international examples and policies worldwide, there is very often the problem of lack of evidence, or that some of the policies are based on myths and sentiments. And this is something we would like to fight with. So bring really the top research and evidence in the field of how to support socio-emotional skills, equip teachers with these tools, and then like rebuild their autonomy and prestige and in implementing these tools to support students.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas. I do want to bring in Daniel Caterina da Silva in a moment, but there's a relevant question which is from Shugra Shudri Khan from Pakistan, and maybe I will direct this to Dr. Buneda. She asks, how can you prepare teachers' own social and emotional skills so that they can teach and integrate them into their teaching?
At our country, this is a problem for the simple reason that teachers or the readiness of the teachers and the principals are being made right now, because the first challenge is the lack of readiness of those teachers and principals is not part to make their or to make they work on improving themselves, so they own SEL competencies, so they can transfer this to the students, and same for the principals. So this is the main challenge we are trying to let's say to resolve. This is the main challenge, and especially that I'm going to say the same thing like Thomas just said, that we are also reforming our curriculum. And this will be the third time in Lebanon history that we do this reform. The last reform was from 1997. So you can imagine that we came a long way, and we are doing a lot of things in order to implement everything related to SEL in the new curriculum.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And just to let you know, Dr. Beneda, there are a few technical issues with your video where it's cutting out, particularly at the start of your answers. So listen, we're going to throw to Daniel Catarina da Silva, who's going to give a mini presentation now, but some of our behind the scenes staff might try to get in contact with you to help with your connection while he's doing that. So let's move the conversation on. Let's get more information now on how best to teach and assess social and emotional skills. Daniel Catarina da Silva, thank you for being so patient. He's a former OECD education analyst who's researched social and emotional skills extensively, and he's joining us now. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Let me share my slides. I hope you can see them right. Yes? Awesome.
Yes, all good.
So thank you so much. So beyond the work the OECD has done with the survey on social and emotional skills, for the last 2 years, we have also looked at the literature, the wider literature, to identify the most recent evidence on the teachability of social and emotional skills and their impact on different life outcomes. And we've also mapped innovative assessment strategies. So after collecting all this technically dense information, we wanted to make sure it could be communicated to policymakers in a synthetic and understandable way. Also to go from research to practice. And this is where this policy paper that we've just recently published comes into play. So this is a very brief document, as I said, that communicates things clearly to policymakers, but also educators, and you can access it through the QR code at the top right of your screen. And it starts by addressing and acknowledging concerns that we have heard from multiple stakeholders regarding the place of social and emotional skills in school educational settings. Concerns like how does teaching these skills interact or potentially clash with academic teaching? How can we assess these skills fairly in an equitable manner and use that information to help our students? How can we ask teachers to take on this mandate, beyond everything else they're doing, without making them feel overburdened? So we start by recognizing all these concerns, and then we move on to discuss the most recent findings on these topics I said to you, but always through a policy lens to make sure the information is seen in a practical manner. And finally, we propose several strategies and more actionable policy recommendations to help advance social and emotional development. And I'm going to discuss a few of these with you today. So the first one is invest in social and emotional development. Seems, I know, quite a sort of a duh statement, very broad and vague, but what's critical about this recommendation is that we need two things to be able to say it. We need to have the information, the data that proves that these skills can indeed be taught in educational settings. And then we need to make sure, or need to prove, that these skills impact different life outcomes, so that we are sure it's worth investing in them. And this is exactly what we found. We have reviewed around 20 different social and emotional skills, and this table just gives you an example of 5. And as you can see, for these 5, on the first row, there's very high evidence for its teachability in educational settings, so through deliberate educational interventions. And this is the case for the majority of the 20 skills we reviewed, where we found substantial data that proves that these can be taught. But it's not just about the teachability. We also see in this table that they relate to different life outcomes. Self-control is a good example of how it positively impacts academic success, employment, job performance, health, and also prevention of antisocial behavior. Whereas if you look at empathy or assertiveness, you see a different pattern. And that also means that you can, if in your system, in your context, you want to reach a particular outcome, you can focus on developing a particular skill or set of skills. So indeed, it is worth investing because we can teach these, we have the proof for that, and it's meaningful to students' lives. Second recommendation is about integrating social emotional learning into the current subjects and activities already done in school. We recognize the importance of, for some context, for some skills, for some student groups, to have an additional social emotional learning intervention on top as an extra block of time to address certain issues. But as a systematic approach, not to overburden teachers, not to create resistance, it's more effective to integrate it into what you already do in class. So developing skills like collaboration, empathy, emotional control, or responsibility by integrating them into the subjects of humanities, sciences, arts, or sports, so that you can gain synergistic effects for both fields. The third recommendation is about measurement, the importance of getting comparable and high quality information on your students' strengths and needs, so you know where to focus on, which skills to focus on, and which student groups need more attention. It's also critical that people really in each context, in each country, the social emotional learning initiatives are assessed to make sure, because they're often context specific, so you need to make sure that the initiative you're implementing in your context is beneficial to your students. Because of this importance of measurement, OECD has done a lot of work in trying to map innovative approaches, and we've focused on behavioral assessments. These try to capture the students' authentic behaviors in action, looking at their choices and their actions in contextualized tasks. And I'll just give you two examples. This is the CREA task, so a very simple interface with which you can assess creativity skills. And then you also have more complex games that have a storytelling element, a narrative, in which in this case you can test social problem solving. So the third round that Hannah referred to is actually going to innovate its mechanisms, not only by improving the quality of the self-reports of students, but will also introduce an innovative, more direct assessment of empathy. So to gain information on this important skill by looking in a concrete task, looking at whether students can take the perspectives of other people, understand their intentions, their emotions, share those emotions, and then select the most appropriate, effective, compassionate response to help those in need. And the last recommendation I want to share with you is what we've already talked in our discussion, the importance of supporting teachers and giving them the right tools and the right incentives for them to integrate social emotional learning into their activities. We know that still a large proportion of teachers are not aware that these skills can be taught, or they think, as Hannah said, that they don't think the school is the right place for this. And so we need to cross that barrier. But beyond that, even when teachers understand these skills are important and they want to teach it, they tell us they don't know how, they don't have the instruments, they were not taught how to teach these skills. So we need to invest in initial teacher programs and into current professional development for current teachers. And also, this is where the OECD can be helpful. In the third round of the survey, we intend to develop what we call teaching toolkits. So very clear, very practical guidelines for teachers to understand how to teach each of the social emotional skills that will be covered in the third round. So if you want to read a few more recommendations and the rationale for them, and if you want to access more in-depth technical information, you can go through the policy paper, and through the policy paper, you can then reach the more dense working papers where you can find all that information. So thank you so much, and let's get back to the panel.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. And just to pick up on one of the last points you were making, because there's a question from the audience, from Rachel Way, who says, our teachers have little time within their day or year to have designated time to learn. Are there creative ways to help teachers find time to build their capacity to teach social and emotional skills? I know you sort of touched on that, but could you elaborate on, are there creative ways to support teachers to do these kinds of tasks?
Our work is mostly focused on what we can do with students. I know teachers already do a lot of professional development, even if they have little time, but there are strategies when they have when they collaborate with their colleagues, workshops to learn how to do these things. It's also important as a starting point to help them to be able to teach these things is to actually assess their current state, and that's also why we want to test teachers' own social emotional skills to have that base and see how we can move on from that. But I don't know if Hanneke has more.
Yes, I think there are, yeah. I think we talked a lot about improving, even in my presentation, but then also throughout the discussion about improving initial teacher education and professional development, and that is important. Yeah, we see that from the data. But I like the point that was just brought up. It's also about really continuous learning, like making time and space and making this important, creating structures also for reflection. For example, team teaching, yeah, to provide each other feedback can be one way. Or what you can also do is what I really like, some systems actually try to bridge the gap between research and practice by providing tools online, but then also providing a tool for teachers to try it out and feedback to research. Did it work? Why didn't it work? How did I need to adapt it? That is just brilliant, because often what we also hear is like, this is not actionable, this doesn't work in my classroom. And we as researchers need to understand why. So that's also very important. And as a principle, I think Raimon already said we shouldn't forget about the principles. You can create structure. You can put it high on the agenda. You can feature like discussions among colleagues. Just don't let it like, okay, will happen automatically. No, you need to make it explicit. You need to create room for reflection on your own skills, on your teaching practices, and so on. Otherwise, this will not happen. This is like, if you just put it into training, then it might fade out, dribble off. It doesn't have the same effect. It really also needs to be embedded into my work life. Otherwise, I will not be able to continuously think about it, embed it into my teaching.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Hannah and Daniel. Let's continue the discussion on how best to teach and assess social and emotional skills. Dr. Bineda, hopefully your connection's a little bit stronger now. You work as an advisor to the Lebanese Education Ministry. In your experience, what strategies are most effective in convincing policymakers to act on findings such as evidence on social and emotional skills?
I will okay, I will turn my camera off. Maybe it will be better. Duncan, can you repeat the last part of the question, because
yes, I was saying, in your experience, what strategies are most effective at convincing policymakers to act on findings? What do you say to those who have the power to make changes, to argue that social and emotional skills are important and they're something which should be taught in schools?
Okay, I will tell you from my experience. So normally, what we do in Lebanon, we have the assessment. So whenever we need to convince a decision maker about changing something, like you do in other countries, so we have those assessment. We have in Lebanon the national assessment, and we have the international assessment. So the idea is that fortunately or unfortunately, but sometimes the international assessment are better equipped in order to if you want, ask or demand or try to convince the decision makers about changing a strategy or changing an approach. So let's say in Lebanon we have the national assessment, such national exams, cycle 3 and cycle 4, but also the most important thing now what we are doing is participating in the international assessment. We're going to participate in TALIS very soon, because we were all discussing about the importance of the teacher in the SEL process, and the principal also as well. So TALIS Plus also will allow us to know better about how to approach better teachers and principals. And also, it's very important to know better this allow a better benchmarking, if you want, to support improvements in both national curriculum, because this is the most important part here now in Lebanon, and eventually later the education system. So I will go back, like as Thomas just said, whenever you have evidence-based, so you can change, you can convince to change the approach and to improve, especially the approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Thomas Giderovic from the Education Research Institute in Warsaw, if I can bring you back in. It's already been mentioned that a lot of teachers still don't have the understanding of how these skills should be taught. In your view, what's the best way to support them to effectively teach these kinds of skills?
Yeah, so the best way is to not only convince policymakers, but mainly convince society that that's the important issue. And I really do believe in something that I would call the formative role of research, like that formative role of these surveys. Like we know the assessment can be for assessment, but also it can be formative for learning. And this is the same with surveys like this. If we do this kind of survey, we publish the results, we discuss it publicly, then we build the awareness of the importance of social and emotional skills in the society. Then we can include teachers, engage them in the discussions around the results. So this is one of the strategies to really increase the general awareness and awareness among teachers and policymakers around issues related to social and emotional skills. Another thing would be the type of monitorings and evaluation that we have in our educational system. Right? Traditionally, we focus on the achievement, on the cognitive domains. But actually, if you would think that monitoring and evaluation should be also focused on assessing in a standardized way social and emotional skills and publishing results, this will bring attention to the tools. This will stimulate the need for supporting instruments in the social and emotional area. So in general, this is one thing: awareness campaign and awareness and formative role of research, then the trust in evidence. That is something that we already mentioned. I mean, in Poland, we are quite lucky in this field because the educational reform that is planned for 2026 was intentionally, for the first time ever in history, as the Educational Research Institute, we were nominated to prepare and give a framework for that reform. So this means that not only the politicians will do the reform, but the research will drive that. So increased awareness combined with evidence policy making is the way forward in addressing these issues.
If I may just jump in, because we will also provide we will support the reflection on the results in round 3, because we will provide school level reports also as an option, where you really get for your school a result, where you stand, students standing in terms of students' social and emotional skills, but also the type of learning environment. And maybe Maria, who unfortunately couldn't join us or could only join us now, she's an expert on teacher preparation and in the US, so maybe she also has some ideas.
Yeah, Maria Heiler, you're joining us late, but to the audience out there, director of the Learning Policy Institute's office in Washington, D.C. She's also director of the Ed Prep Lab, which supports the sharing of research and best practice. So thank you for joining us late, Maria. Do you have any reflections on what you've just heard on ways to improve social emotional learning and teaching in schools?
Thank you, and apologies for the mistaken time zones. So I really appreciated what you were saying, Hannah, about structures and processes, and that goes through teacher preparation as well as K-12 systems as well. And what we found, particularly during the pandemic, was that the teachers needed SEL and social emotional supports as much as the students, as did faculty of teacher preparation. And so it really was a time of crisis for everyone. And we noticed that teachers and principals were giving so much of themselves, and the students had so many needs that their own needs were not being taken care of. And so when we think about prioritizing the social emotional needs of the adults in school buildings, that then helps to understand the benefits for students as well. And so really, as you were saying, having the time and the space built into the school structures is really important. And likewise in teacher preparation. So how do we design teacher preparation to prioritize and center social emotional skills to help our novice teachers go into spaces prepared, and our novice leaders prepared to not only create but to sustain and nurture learning environments that prioritize social and emotional learning as well as academic learning. And so we have to recognize that SEL is not just something that's nice to do and is an added benefit, but is necessary. So that research part that you were talking about is so important to help our novice teachers as well as policymakers understand that the neuroscience, the science of learning and development requires that our students feel safe, that they feel that relationships are strong and positive. All this impacts their ability to learn. And so if that research is highlighted and the impact of structures and support systems around social emotional development in schools is highlighted for the public, for policymakers, and for our novice teachers, that's going to help propel this becoming business as usual, as opposed to something that's nice to have but not necessary. And so when we think about teacher preparation, the same kinds of things that we want to see for our K-12 students, we want to see for our candidates. And that means that our faculty in higher ed and our preparation programs need to start to understand what that looks like and how that works with adult learning as well. So what are the adult learning needs of our candidates, and how can faculty support that and model the types of social emotional capacities that they want their candidates to engage in K-12 classrooms. So
Okay.
yes.
To pick up on one of the things you mentioned there, saying how this should be a necessary part of education, the teaching and learning of social and emotional skills. How big are political barriers to supporting that goal, the development of social and emotional skills in the States?
I would say that it depends on where you are and how it's being taken up. There are quite a few states that have policies now in place that support and align teacher accreditation and teacher standards with social emotional learning. And we see a great push and an understanding of the research of why that is effective. And then in other spaces, there's still the political pushback against social emotional learning as being soft skills, and a real strong push for being more traditional in the pursuits of academics without really understanding the research behind social emotional learning. So I would say that it's variable, but there are some really bright spots in some states that are prioritizing and understanding the benefits of social emotional learning being embedded in the systems to accredit and to teach our students.
Okay, thanks for that. There is a very busy chat, so thanks to everyone who is commenting and making questions, writing in questions and writing answers for that matter as well. There's a question here which is basically open to the panel if anyone wants to answer it. Elizabeth Labat from Spain asking, should there be more well-being, mediation and psychology experts in schools, or do such skills need to be taught to teachers as part of teacher training if we're to encourage social and emotional learning? Perhaps Thomas or Dr. Buneda, would either of you care to answer that one? Do you think there should be more well-being, mediation, psychology experts in schools, or should teachers being taught some of these things to support social and emotional learning?
Probably both. With more experts being engaged in the school, that's actually a question related to money, resources, and the school organization. That's somehow beyond what we are talking about here, because this requires resources. But the other channel, which is equipping teachers with tools to support social and emotional skills of students, is something that at the end of the day does not require additional resources except for the training and the tools, but this is not something that is dramatically changing the financial part of the educational system. But at the same time, I think that teachers are too close to all of the educational situations that they should be, that's the obligatory thing, equipped with the tools to support social and emotional learning.
Yes, and this is maybe a perfect spot for also announcing that there will be a new little spotlight. It will be a very short brief on school psychologists and the role. And the general gist is a little bit, of course, there should be more of those, as Thomas said, but both. We shouldn't say like, okay, that means we shift all over to the school psychologist. No, actually, yes, they are for particular cases, and they can actually support and should collaborate also with the teachers, because the teachers have way more contact with the students and they know them better. So actually for both to work well, you need to collaborate. And also teachers can learn, of course, from school psychologists. What can I do if they reach a limit or something? Or if there's a particular case, what can I do in my classroom, even though there's additional support? There should be an ongoing collaboration. It shouldn't be an either or. So there should be both. That will be optimal. And collaboration should also be assured.
So I'll just say that we have also documented in a working paper that was published a year ago, it was in November last year, several social and emotional learning strategies implemented throughout the world. And some of them are conducted by teachers, some of them are conducted by psychologists, some of them are conducted in collaborations. Some document that psychologists come into the school and teach teachers how to help their students. So there are a variety of strategies to do this.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks again to the questions coming in. There's another one here from Lopa Gandhi who asks, are there examples of peer-led social and emotional learning in classrooms or schools, especially for remote rural schools? Now, I don't know who on the panel might be best placed to answer that, but are there examples of peer-led social and emotional learning, especially for remote or rural schools? Maybe Daniel, Hannah, Thomas, Maria, anyone?
What comes to mind for me are restorative practices for discipline, where students themselves are taught the skills to engage in conflict mediation amongst themselves. So the idea of restorative practices are that students have the capacity themselves to engage in peer-to-peer conflict resolution. And so if given the skills, so oftentimes we see that happening in rural schools, in urban schools across the board, but it is an example of students learning the self-regulation, the processes to engage in that type of SEL with one another.
Okay.
Yes, and also in the chat, someone pointed to Aulas in Paz, my colleague. That's also described. There are a lot of examples of these. Another one is, for example, also eco clubs. That's for a very particular field in India, an initiative to increase sustainable thinking and taking over responsibility in that area. And it also works with teachers, but also students leading these groups, these eco club groups. That's another example. There are a few examples actually also in the publication.
I'll actually share in the chat now that working paper with the documented boxes. I don't recall that we have documented strategy particularly for a rural area. We've documented strategies to tackle students from minority groups, or students from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, or to certain contexts dealing with substance abuse or overuse of alcohol. Strategies that develop self-control, emotional control, self-awareness, that then have positive outcomes on all these aspects. So I'll share this with you now in the chat.
Okay, absolutely fantastic. Thanks again for the questions. We are close to running out of time though. So a final question for all 6 members of the panel. If there was one critical action or priority which you believe should be taken to advance social and emotional learning, that could be at a policy level, at a school level, or in classrooms. What would you like to see happen in your own countries? Or for the policy analysts overall elsewhere in the world? What's the critical action or priority you believe should be taken? Maybe Hannah or Fritz, we start with you.
Oh, with me. Well, I would like to see some data from Germany or a German-speaking country. That would be my wish, but I'm an analyst. But overall, for practices, yes, that would be probably to make yeah to really increase this to making social emotional learning actionable and embedded into subject teaching. So it's not like an add-on, not perceived as an add-on, but something that's actually interwoven into teaching and also into the learning, because that's actually the case, as a lot of us already said. So it should also be interwoven, and that should be made more explicit with explicit tools, with explicit curriculum that bind these things together. Yes.
And Thomas, what's your reflections on that? If there was a key policy action you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, I would like to see social and emotional skills being perceived equally important as achievements and being always analyzed like one with another. And then this will stimulate discussion on both the school level, households level, between students, and this will bring the importance of these things way up than it is now. So I would say, yeah, let's make this discussion happen, not between us experts, but let's make it happen everywhere in the educational system.
Excellent. And Dr. Brunetta?
So I would say that why not to sustain and integrate the SEL really in the curriculum? Because the curriculum should serve as the foundation for the SEL skills. And we have to allocate time to explicit those SEL instruction in everyday work, everyday classes. So why not let's dream by integrating SEL into daily classroom activities maybe and extracurricular programs. And I want to say something also, like Mr. Schleicher, like Andres always is always saying, students learn best from the teacher they love, right? So we need to raise the awareness at the teacher again and the principal level, uh, because it might have a very positive impact on leveraging social emotional practices.
Excellent. We need more lovable teachers. And Daniel, Caterina da Silva, if there's a
I will,
key
I will
policy
echo what
you'd like to
Raymond
promote.
said. I think the element of awareness is critical. It's where everything starts. If we all understand that this is important, that we can do this together, that there is research out there, that we have the techniques. If people are invested, they will commit to this and it will work. But that there needs to be work in communicating this and raising that collective awareness.
Excellent. And Maria Heiler from the Learning Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. The final word goes to you.
I agree with everyone and the sentiments that were just shared. In particular, I think that the idea that SEL is necessary for achievement, for learning, and that research highlighted to policymakers, in particular by highlighting bright spots and practices and structures that are in place so that resources can be given to do all of the things that folks just said and integrated in the curriculum, have the processes and the structures is key. And also, one of the things that struck me is that not only should policymakers understand that, they should understand that achievement, where achievement is happening, SEL is invisible. Those things are happening, those relationships, the pieces that kids are feeling safe, they're feeling identity safe, and they're feeling they have the good relationships, and where it's not happening, it's also invisible. So understanding that this is not something that is natural, it's something that needs to be attended to intentionally so that all students have the access to SEL and not just a few students who have the resources or who are more have access to the types of relationships in SEL that's embedded already in the work that they do. So an issue around equity in SEL is important to consider as well.
Excellent. And I can see a number of the panelists nodding along to what you were saying there, Maria. So good to end, I presume, on a note of agreement. Sadly, that is all we have time for. Thank you for everyone for taking part in this webinar, for all the questions as well, to Tomas Gajderovic, Maria Heiler, Raymond Buneda, Daniel Katerina da Silva, and Hannah Ulferts. They've all done a fantastic job. And please do join us again soon for another OECD webinar. Coming soon, there is going to be the launch of the OECD Survey for Adult Skills next week, which you can check out next Tuesday. It's packed full of very interesting information indeed. All the best and hope to see you soon.